Welcome to our channel, Ielts Concept. Please subscribe for daily practice test. Ielts listening test.
The test is in 4-part, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a representative of an insurance company and a customer. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 3. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 3.
Good morning, Total Insurance. Judy speaking. How may I help you?
I recently shipped my belongings from overseas back here to Australia, and I took out insurance with your company. Some items were damaged during the move, so I need to make a claim. What do I have to do?
Okay, well, first I need to get a few details about this. Can you give me your name, please?
Yes, it's Michael Alexander.
Okay, and your address, please?
My old address or my current one?
Your current one.
It's 24 Manly Street, Milperra, near Sydney.
What was the suburb, sorry?
Milperra, Milperra.
Right. Now, who was the shipping agent, Mr. Alexander?
You mean the company we used?
Yes, the company who packed everything up at the point of origin.
Oh, it was, First Class Movers.
Okay. Where were the goods shipped from?
China, but the ship came via Singapore and was there for about a week.
Don't worry, all of that information will be in the documentation. Now, the dates. Do you know when the ship arrived?
It left on the 11th of October and got to Sydney on the 28th of November.
Okay. I need one more thing. There's a reference number. It should be in the top right-hand corner of the pink form they gave you.
Let me have a look. I have so many papers. Yes, here it is. It's 601ACK.
Thanks.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 4 to 10.
I need to take down a few details of the actual damage over the phone before you put in a full report. Can you tell me how many items were damaged and what the damage was?
Yes, well, 4 things actually. I'll start with the big things. My TV, first of all. It's a large one, very expensive.
Insurance doesn't cover electrical problems.
It isn't an electrical problem. The screen has a huge crack in it, so it's unusable.
I see. Any idea of the price to repair it?
No. Well, I don't think it can be repaired. It will need a new one.
Okay, I'll make a note of that and we'll see what we can do. Now, what was the second item?
The cabinet from the bathroom was damaged as well. It's a lovely cabinet. We use it to keep our towels in.
And what is the extent of the damage?
Well, the back and the sides seem okay, but the door has a huge hole in it. It can't be repaired. I'm really not very happy about it.
And how much do you think it will cost to replace it?
Well, when I bought it last year, I paid $125 for it. But the one I've seen here in Sydney is a bit more expensive. It's $140.
Right. And what was the third item?
My dining room table. It's a lovely table from Indonesia. It must have been very hot inside the container because one leg has completely split down the middle. The top and the other 3 look okay, thank goodness.
Any idea of the price to repair it?
Well, I had an estimate done on this actually because it is a very special table to us. They quoted us $200, which is really pricey, so I hope the insurance will cover the total cost.
I'm sure that will be fine. What was the last item, Mr. Alexander?
Well, we have a lovely set of china plates and dishes, with matching cups, saucers, the lot. They were all in the one box, which must have got dropped because some plates were broken. 6, actually.
And can you tell me the replacement value of these?
Well, it's hard to say because they were part of a set, but they can be up to $10 each as it's such a good set.
OK, so that would be around $60 altogether.
Yes, that's right.
And is that all of the items?
Yes. So, what do I have to do now?
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a man talking on the radio about dogs which help people with their work. First, look at questions 11 and 12. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 11 and 12.
Welcome to this week's edition of Countrywide. And today, we're taking a look at a number of different breeds of working dogs. And here to report on the dogs with jobs is Kevin Thornhill.
Thanks, Joanne. Well, yes, dogs with jobs is the subject of today's program. Dogs have earned themselves a reputation over the centuries for being extremely loyal. And here's a little story which illustrates just how loyal they are. Just outside the country town of Gundagai in Australia is a statue built to commemorate a dog. A dog which sat waiting for his owner to return to the spot where he'd left him. Well, the story, which was immortalised in a song, has it that the poor dog died waiting for his master, 5 miles from Gundagai, which is where they built the statue. Now that's what I call loyalty.
Now look at questions 13 to 20. As the talk continues, complete the table for questions 13 to 20.
Well, because of their loyalty and also their ability to learn practical skills, dogs can be trained to do a number of very valuable jobs. Perhaps the most well-known of working dogs is the Border Collie sheepdog. Sheepdogs which work in unison with their masters need to be smart and obedient, with a natural ability to herd sheep. Some farmers say that their dogs are so smart that they not only herd sheep, they can count them too. Another much-loved working dog is the guide dog, trained to work with the blind. Guide dogs, usually Labradors, need to be confident enough to lead their owner through traffic and crowds, but they must also be of a gentle nature. It costs a great deal of money to train a dog for this very valuable work, but the guide dog associations in the UK, America and Australia receive no government assistance, so all the money comes from donations. Another common breed of work dog is the German Shepherd. German Shepherds make excellent guard dogs and are also very appropriate as search and rescue dogs, working in disaster zones after earthquakes and avalanches. These dogs must be tough and courageous to cope with the arduous conditions of their work, and so that they can be sent anywhere in the world to assist in disaster relief operations, effective dogs and their trainers are now listed on an international database. When you arrive at an airport here, you may be greeted in the baggage hall by a detector dog, wearing a little red coat bearing the words "Quarantine." These dogs are trained to sniff out fresh fruit as well as meat and even live animals hidden in people's bags. In order to be effective, a good detector dog must have an enormous food drive. In other words, they must really love their food. At Sydney Airport, where there are 10 detector dogs working full-time, they stop about 80 people a month trying to bring illegal goods into the country. And according to their trainers, they very rarely get it wrong. Another famous working dog is the husky. Huskies, which originally came from Siberia, have been used for decades as a means of transport on snow, particularly in Antarctica where they have played an important role. Huskies are well adapted to harsh conditions and they enjoy working in a team. But the huskies have all left Antarctica now because the international treaty prohibits their use in the territory as they are not native animals. Many people were sad to see the dogs leave Antarctica, as they had been vital to the early expeditions and earned their place in history along with the explorers.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a first-year marketing student called Leo talking to a second-year student called Anna about his marketing report. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26.
Anna, I wanted to ask you about my marketing report. I'm not sure about it.
That's okay, Leo. So what do you have to do?
Choose a product or service, then compare 2 organisations that produce it. I'm doing instant coffee.
But haven't you got a weekend job in a clothing store? Why didn't you choose clothing?
That was my first thought, because I thought it'd give me some practical examples. But when I searched for men's clothing on the internet, there were hardly any articles. So then I looked for coffee, and I found there were tons.
Yeah, there are so many brands on the market now. OK, so how much have you actually written?
I've done part 1 on economic and technological factors. I found some good data on technological changes, how in Australia fewer people are buying instant coffee because of cheap coffee percolators that they can use to make real coffee at home.
But there's also a movement away from drinking coffee.
Switching to things like herbal teas instead because they think it's healthier. But that's not really to do with technology. It's more cultural. Anyway, for part 2, I'm comparing 2 instant coffee companies, Coffee Now and Schaffers. And I've made this table of products.
Right. Let's see. So you've got the brand names and prices and selling size and descriptions. OK, the table looks good. You'll get marks for research there. Where will it go?
In the section on the marketing mix, under product.
Not in the appendix?
No.
OK, but it's too factual on its own. You need to add some comment in that section about the implications of the figures.
Right. I'll do that. Now, I want to say that I think that Schaffers is more of a follower than a leader in the coffee industry. Now, I'm putting that in the section on market share. Does that seem okay?
Let's see. So, you've begun by explaining what market share is. That's important. But you've got to be careful how you give that opinion.
Do you think it should go in another section?
Well, it's fine where it is, but you've got to back it up with some data, or they'll say your report lacks weight.
OK. One thing I'm worried about is finding anything original to say.
Well, since this is your first marketing report, you're not expected to go out and do interviews and things to collect your own data. You're just using published data. So the analysis you do might not throw up anything that people didn't know before. But the focus is more on how you handle the data. I mean, you might take something like a graph of sales directly from a website, but what makes your work original is the perspective you provide by your interpretation of it.
Oh. You know, it's all so different from business studies assignments at school. It's really surprised me.
What? How much research you have to do?
I expected that. It's more, I knew exactly what I had to do to get a good grade at school. And I knew I'd be expected to go more deeply into things here. But I haven't got information on how the lecturer is going to grade my work, what he's looking for.
Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Well, one thing you have to remember is that in a marketing report, you've got to have what they call an executive summary at the beginning. I forgot that and I got marked down.
Yeah, I've drafted it. I've got an overview.
Have you got something about the background there?
Yeah.
Good.
So, I've just made a summary of the main points. I wasn't sure whether or not I should have my aims there.
No, that's too personal. The executive summary is just like what a manager would read to get a general idea of your report if he was in a hurry.
Right. Then I'm okay for the first main part, all of the macro environment stuff. But it's when I get onto the problem section, I've listed all the problems that Coffee Now and Schaffers are facing. But then what?
Well, you have to prioritise. So indicate the main problems, and then you analyse each one by connecting it with a theory. That's where your reading comes in.
OK.
Have you done your implementation section yet?
I've thought about it. So that's where I write about what could be done about the problems.
Yes. And it's got to be practical, so don't forget to specify things like who would be involved, and the cost, and the order that things would be done in.
Right. Well, that shouldn't take long.
You'd be surprised. Actually, that's the bit that tends to get badly done because people run out of time. That and the conclusion.
Oh, any hints for that?
Well, it's got to draw out the main points from your report. So it's got to be quite general. You need to avoid introducing new stuff here. It's got to sum up what you've said earlier.
OK. Thanks, Anna. That's been a big help.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You'll hear a lecturer talking to students about America in the 1960s. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 37. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 37.
We begin our examination of America in the 1960s with the usual caution. There is no sense in trying to understand any decade without looking at what came before. Those of you who still have outstanding coursework on the 1950s would do well to complete it now, if for no other reason than it will help make sense of the next series of lectures. But we must press on, and I'd like to begin my talk about the 60s with a reference to one of those things that came before, the post-war baby boom. With the end of the Second World War in 1945, there began in the USA an era of perceived prosperity and security. In short, people started to feel that the world was a much better and safer place to bring up children. So, at the start of the 60s, all those children born in the baby boom, 70 million in the US alone, were teenagers. As the 60s progressed, and as this large number of people approached adulthood, there was a noticeable shift in the balance of power, and young people began to have a voice in ways that were not considered possible in the more conservative atmosphere of the preceding decade. Things were moving forward at a rapid pace. The literature of the time brought out all the taboos. Everything was covered, such as race in, for example, the book To Kill a Mockingbird. The role of women changed, and equality for women, well, let's just say that once certain books were published, women were no longer going to be satisfied with their roles as devoted wives and mothers. Through literature alone, the whole fabric of society was challenged, and by the end of the 60s, things would never again be as they had pretty much been for the preceding 40 years. It was a decade of protest, civil rights protests, feminism, the rights of minorities, the Vietnam War. All these causes led to peaceful and not so peaceful protests on college campuses and elsewhere. People had been given freedom of speech and they were going to use it. The crime rate rose to 9 times what it was in the 50s, as respect for the old order faded away. But it was also a time of great development. In medicine, the 60s saw the first heart transplant. In technology and the space race, where we saw the first American in orbit and lasers being invented at the start of the decade, and the first man on the moon, and the first primitive internet at the end.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 38 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 38 to 40.
None of this, good or bad, might have happened if things in 1962 had gone slightly differently. On October 16th, President John F. Kennedy met with his closest advisors at the White House. They had obtained photographic evidence showing that Cuba was building or installing nuclear weapons. It was widely believed that Cuba was preparing to fire these weapons at cities in the USA. Kennedy was faced with three choices: to try to resolve the crisis diplomatically by negotiating with Cuba and the Soviet Union, to take action to block the delivery of more weapons into Cuba, or to attack Cuba, destroying their weapons. Believing that the first option would end in failure and that the third option would lead to war, it was the second option that Kennedy chose. In doing so, he succeeded in preventing the buildup of more missiles. The Soviet Union then withdrew the weapons from Cuba. Most historians agree that if Kennedy had acted differently, the episode would have led to a full-scale nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Millions would have died, and the world would have been changed beyond recognition.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to your Ielts listening answer sheet.